All right, perfect. Well, thank you everyone for coming. As we get started, if you need me to change the format for better visual ability, please let me know. I'm happy to make those changes. But otherwise, welcome to job searching and resume building. So today we'll talk a lot about building up your resume, getting you ready for your job search, and then we'll talk a little bit about the job searching process and what that looks like, general tips. This is something that I could literally spend 8 hours talking about, so I had to condense a lot of information into 50 minutes. So you will likely have questions. Feel free to jump in at any time with any questions that you have. And if there's a topic that we don't cover, you're always welcome to reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to chit chat with you about the information. All right, so who am I? So my name is Camille Denon. I'm one of our chapter visitation assistants. So I assist with all the lovely visits that we get from our CVAs across the nation. I am based in Phoenix, Arizona, so I typically serve with the Western District, but I'm happy to meet people who are outside of that. I'm a life member of Zeta Xi at the San Diego State University Go Aztecs chapter, and professionally, I'm a recruiter. So my job is to look at resumes and hire people for 8 hours a day, which for some people sounds really dull, but for me, it sparks joy and I love being able to do it. So when I am talking, I know a little bit about the context, but I will say, generally speaking, every industry is a little different. So you know the own nuances for your own industry. So this is a very general presentation that you can take the basics and adapt it to whatever field you're trying to go into. All right, so let's talk a little bit about resumes. Perfect. Okay, so I know this is simple information, but a resume is a document that contains the information about your experience and employment history. So this is really your opportunity to sell your experience in an 8x11 page of paper, which can seem really daunting because how do you pick? What if I don't have enough? What do I do in the in-between? But we will help you get through that. You use this information literally for the rest of your life. You'll use it when you apply for jobs, if you're applying for internships, graduate school, volunteer opportunities. So when I became a CVA, I had to submit a resume in order to apply for this volunteer position. So it's really going to follow you wherever you're going. And I like to think of a resume as a living document. So it's not something you look at once and then you put it in your closet and then you find it 10 years later when you're doing your spring training. It's something that you'll be looking at pretty frequently throughout your career and your life. And then generally speaking, this is the first impression that anybody is going to get from you when you're applying for these positions. We don't know who you are. We've never seen your face. We don't know how funny you are right off the bat. This one pager is really how we get the first glance of who you are as an employee and what your experiences are. So some general things about resumes to include and to omit. So the first is your name. So your name is likely going to be the biggest thing on this 8x11, and it's going to be at the top of the page. And the reason for that is because you want to make sure the employer knows your name as you're moving forward through the process. So your name and then your contact information is going to be really important. Now, when we talk about contact information, you want to make sure you have a good phone number for them to reach you at, and then a good email address. Those are the two primary ways that recruiters and employers will communicate with you. Occasionally, they'll reach out via LinkedIn or other social media sites here. But those are the two that you want to make sure you include on your resume. You want to make sure you include your relevant experience. Now, the key word in this statement is relevant. So if you have a lot of experience, but it doesn't make sense for the job that you're applying for, that's just wasted space on a piece of paper that you're not selling your story on. So you want to make sure that the information that you have is really relevant to the position that you're applying for. An example would be if I'm applying for a job to work in a laboratory, it does not make sense to put that I was the #1 champion on my trivia team focusing on history. Those two things don't quite correlate. It's a really cool, fun fact, but it's not something that needs to be in your resume as you go through that. You want to use bullet points for your resume. There's two popular formats of resumes. You have your bullet point format, and then you have your paragraph format. As a recruiter, I am telling you, the paragraph format, unless it's specifically requested, are very difficult to read quickly. You cannot grasp quick information out of that. And so you're less likely to be considered because they can't pull out the important information quickly. You have X amount of recruiters who look at hundreds and hundreds of applicants a day. And so you want to make sure that they can get the information that you need in about 2 minutes. Recruiters usually spend about 2 minutes a resume, which does not seem like a lot of time. And it's not. So you want to make sure that that bullet points are good and they're giving the information that you need. You want a section about your skills. You all have a lot of great skills that you are learning. So whether it's technology, your proficiencies and, Word Suite, so Microsoft's PowerPoint, Excel, etc. If you speak any languages, those are really important. If you have any work with special technology or coding, so if you've worked with SQL, for instance, or you learned Python in one of your college courses, those are great things to include in your skills. And then education. So education is important to put on. As you'll see about, I believe I read the study said 63% of jobs do require a degree that are posted on LinkedIn. And so making sure that you have your experience and that is well formatted is important so that people know that you meet those minimum requirements. So some things to omit. The first is your picture. So you don't want to include your picture unless you're applying for jobs in Europe. But if you're applying for jobs in the US, you want to omit your picture. And there's a couple reasons why. The first is that you want people to be able to base your information based off of your resume, not what you look like on a piece of paper. The second is that a lot of companies, in order to avoid potential bias, will automatically remove resumes from their candidate pool that have pictures in them. So I highly recommend not including your picture unless, again, it's specifically requested for in the job application. So I know sometimes marketing positions will ask for pictures and things like that. So just keep that in mind. Your address is also something that is no longer needed on your resumes. So typically speaking, when you fill out a job application, you'll enter your address in there, but putting it on your resume is outdated. It takes up unnecessary space it takes up a line of space that you could be using for other information. And it can also be restricting. So if I live in California and I'm applying for a job in Iowa and I see, oh, they live in California, we don't want to pay relocation costs. We're not going to go forward with this application. So your address is really not needed in today's market on your resume. And then again, information not related to the position. And this is really difficult because sometimes we do a lot of things that we're really proud of, but they're not necessarily relevant to the work that we're doing. And I will give you some examples of that as we look at some sample resumes. But making sure your information is concise and related to the position is important. And then next is poor grammar and spelling. So if you've checked it once, you've checked it twice, you should probably still check it a third time. Poor grammar and spelling is not a good thing to have on your resume, especially if under your skills you have listed attention to detail. So you want to make sure that you're double and triple checking your grammar and spelling. I personally like to work with my resumes through Google Docs. Google Docs does not always catch everything, so it's always good to look at it in Word. It's always good to have somebody else put their eyes on it too. Just so that, when you're in the same document for hours and hours, sometimes all the words start to look the same and you think you've got it. And then somebody else looks at it and they see that you omitted a letter in your email. That's really important. So little things like that. So it's always good to get an extra set of eyes when you're looking at those things there. So general tips, now that we've talked about that. So you want to keep your resume to one page. So again, unless you're in an industry, so I used to be in the higher education industry. It was very common to have 2-page resumes there. That would not be uncommon. In the most corporate positions, 1 page is more than enough. So you really want to keep your resume to 1 page because, like I said, recruiters don't have a lot of time to read through pages and pages of information, particularly if it's not relevant. So 7-page resumes are hard no. So you want to make sure that you're keeping your resumes concise into that 1 page unless your industry indicates otherwise. You want to make sure your formatting looks right. So you want to make sure all your dates are aligned on the left or right hand side, whatever you pick. You want to make sure all your bullet points make sense. You want to make sure your fonts are consistent. So you don't want to start in Times New Roman and then wind up in Wingding by the end of your resume. So make sure your fonts are consistent and really looking at the general formatting of the document. Again, making sure you're including that relevant information, checking your spelling and grammar. And then you want to build a base resume around the type of job you're applying for and then tweaks from there. So very common advice, which is good advice, is that you need a different resume for almost every job you apply for, which is true. However, you are a human being and you do not have time to make 20 individual super specific resumes for each position. So if you decide I want to work in a laboratory, you make a laboratory-based resume. And then when you find the job that you're looking for, you make minor tweaks to that base resume so that you're not starting from scratch every time that you're applying. So you can rechange the order of your bullet points. You can change some relevant information. You can do things that are important without having to start at zero because it's very time consuming and it's not a whole lot of fun if it's not something you like to do. Next is saving your resume as a PDF when applying for positions. A lot of the applicant tracking systems or ATSs just tend to read and are able to extrapolate information from PDFs easier than Word documents. So I do recommend using PDFs when saving. The thing you want to check though is if you're in a Word document and you save as a PDF, make sure your formatting aligns because sometimes it'll look like 1 page on a Word and then come out to 2 pages on a PDF, or you may have some wonky lining. So you just want to make sure when you save, it saves the way that you want it to save. And then lastly, titling your resume. So when you save your resume and upload it into the system, you want to use your first name dot last name resume as the title of your document. You don't want to just put resume. You don't want to put, oh my God, I'm so sick of this. You don't want to put, please, please, please give me this job. You really want to make sure that you have your first name dot last name on the resume. So that way people know who you are and it's really easy for people to come back. So if I go back and I say, okay, I want to see Erica's resume, I can type in Erica's resume and it pops back up easily, as opposed to if I just have to type in resume, I'm getting every resume that's ever been sent. So those are some good general tips about your resume. So before we jump into cover letters, I want to go over a few sample resumes to kind of show you some differences and different industries and really show you how to tailor some information. So I'm going to move this box down here. So the first resume I'm going to show you is, this is my resume from when I worked in higher education. So here you'll see we have big font. Camille Denon is the biggest thing on this page. I do happen to think I'm larger than life, so it matches my personality. And then you'll see I just have my phone number and my email. Very simple. Here I started off with my education first. So you can see my degrees, you can see what they're in. If you have not completed your degree yet, that's okay. You can put to be conferred in, insert year here. So you can still include that education in there. So when we move on from the education, you can see my work experience. So you can see I have these bullet points. I made sure that whatever I'm currently doing is in present tense. So at the time I was currently working as an assistant director. So I supervise, I deliver because that's something I'm actively doing. And then when you go into past positions, you want to make sure that you have those in past tense. So because you're no longer doing it, this is one of those grammar syntax things that people keep an eye out when they're looking at resumes. So you want to make sure the tensing of your resumes is good. You'll notice we have the location of where we worked and the dates that are all aligned here on the side. And then when we go down, I have a specific internship section. So this is an internship that I did, and many of you may choose to do internships. And so if you want to label those specifically, you can. If you don't want to label them specifically, you don't have to. And I'll show you an example of that in a little bit. Here we have our activities. So I was able to incorporate my TBS experience in the role. So I talked about, my role as a chapter visitation assistant, talked about being a chapter advisor, and then talked about when I served on district council. So those were things that were relevant to the position and working with students that I thought was important. And then lastly, we have proficiency in the skills and then languages. I'm going to do a quick shout out about Microsoft Excel. There's a very big difference between basic knowledge in Excel and proficiency in Excel. So if an interviewer were to ask you if you know how to do a VLOOKUP and you don't know what that means, do not put proficient in Excel on your resume. VLOOKUP is one of the basic things in Excel, and it's a lot of ways how employers can tell if you actually know Excel or don't. So if you don't know it, it's okay, but don't say that you know everything about Microsoft Excel and then you wind up not knowing it. Excel is a big one that a lot of companies use and expect they don't want to train people on. They have really great LinkedIn learning courses or Google courses that you can take on Excel if that's a skill you want to improve. But I just thought I would shout that one out because that tends to be a tricky spot for a lot of applicants. So this is one example. So this was obviously 2 pages, which made sense for my industry at the time. When I became a recruiter, I could no longer have 2 pages. So this is the 2.0 version of one that I specifically made. So this was a general campus recruiter position that I made where I tailored the information to what was relevant. So I'm going to point out one bullet point to give my point. So first you'll notice I put my education not at the top. Not working in higher education, your degrees are not nearly as focused on. So I changed the focus of the resume to focus on my relevant experience first. So if we go back to this one, you'll notice under assistant director, my first bullet point is to supervise and support 15 academic advisors. On my campus recruiter, I have nothing about supervision on here because supervision was not relevant to the position I was applying for. I was not going to supervise anybody. There's not right now an opportunity to supervise anybody, and it wasn't in the job description. So as much as it hurt me because I love supervising my staff, it was really great. I had to take it out of my resume because it was taking up space of information that was more relevant to the position that I was applying for. So it's a prime example of how you do so many things in your job, but how do you pick the important ones that are important to what you're applying for? So completely different resume for the same position. So I was applying for a recruiter. So I really focused on my experiences of interviewing people, managing recruitment processes, the hiring process, how we scored matrices, and how we did the evaluation process. So that's really what I focused on, even though I did a million other things in that assistant director role. You'll notice I did not have a special activities section. So I did include my TBS history because we talked about presentations and being able to chat with people virtually. It was a remote job. So that I showed my experience of being able to work remotely across time zones and across those different areas. And then really shorten this. This used to be almost a page on my other resume. Took it down to 7 bullet points. So really being able to condense that information. Then I included my education at the bottom of this page here. And then lastly, we have the computer skills. So here I added some special things. So if you all work with Handshake at your universities, that's a great technology to put on that you're proficient and use. It's very popular. If you work for your university as like a student staff member, an RA or something like that, you likely have experience with a PeopleSoft, a Salesforce, Qualtrics, Workday, any of those technologies that you're using on a daily basis. That's good information to put in your resume. So don't sell yourself short there. And then languages. So if you took any foreign languages, feel free to add them. Just be realistically about your proficient. So if I'm fluent in French, I can speak French on a dime. There's no hesitation, nothing there. If you're fluent at reading French, but not speaking it, you can put proficient in reading French, moderate at speaking French. So you can even differentiate in that. And the reason why it's important is because if you put it in your resume and then your interviewer says, okay, I see on your resume, you speak Spanish. Let's switch to Spanish for the rest of this interview. You don't want to get caught off guard by saying you spoke a language that you don't actually speak. So important note there. And then the next resume I want to share with you is somebody from a completely different industry. I did redact some information, change some locations in here to maintain some privacy for this resume. But this is a resume for a student who is applying for a position fresh out of school. So they don't have a lot of professional work experience. And so this is really focused on what their experiences were while they were in education. So they did have their name up here. I deleted that for the sake of this presentation. So here they have their university. So my favorite university in sunny Massachusetts. And they talked about what the degree is when it's conferred. Then they included their relevant coursework. And so including your relevant coursework is something that can be really beneficial to you, as it shows that, yes, I do have foundational information in these topics. So yes, I may not have worked professionally with physical chemistry, but I know the basics and I passed the course, so I can do this. They spoke about their technical skills right up front. So here they mentioned that they do know Python as a coding language. So that's, depending on what field you're going in, very popular. Photoshop, Adobe Photoshop is a big one that a lot of employers look for, especially if you're going to that marketing realm, things like that. So that's a good one there. And then they talked about specific projects. So they talked about their capstone project, their senior project, and those are things that are great because A, it shows that you've worked on something. So this is for one of our laboratory positions. So they talked about membrane fouling. And this shows that you have, while you don't have professional experience, you know the process. So I can walk through the scientific method process and show you, I came up with a hypothesis. This is how we work through it. This was our conclusion. So that is what you're showcasing, that you can work through the processes, even though you haven't done it professionally. And then they mentioned their leadership skills. So they have information about their work as an RA on campus, but then they also have information about the Greek life that they're involved with. So you can still find ways to incorporate all of the activities that you're doing on campus in a resume while keeping it relatively relevant. What was smart here is that being an RA and a facilities director does not necessarily equal beaker in a laboratory, right? So they put that towards the bottom of their resume because A, it helps fill up that space. So if I don't have enough information to fill up my resume, but still need to get to one page, it fills up the space. It shows leadership, right? So you're showcasing your leadership skills here, but it makes sure that my eyes as a recruiter are catching the important stuff right at the top, because that's going to be what's most memorable up there. So this is a really well-crafted resume and making sure that the relevant information was at top. And then if I didn't have enough space, I filled it in with the information at the bottom. All right. Does anybody have any questions before I move forward? I know that was a lot of information. Oops, go ahead, Kendall.
Oh, I was saying I don't have any yet.
All right, perfect. Okay, so next we're going to touch on cover letters for a Scotch. Now, I'm not going to go nearly in depth on cover letters. The reason being is that cover letters are slowly becoming obsolete. So as you go through job searching and processes, a lot of companies are moving away from cover letters for a couple reasons. One, applicants hate using them. Studies show that you will get less applicants if you require a cover letter than if you don't require a cover letter, because it puts a lot of effort on the candidates to apply. And what we're finding is that people don't know how to write good cover letters. So let me give you a little background, then we'll go a little bit more in depth. So this is a document that's going to complement your resume on job application. So your resume is still the first impression, still the primary document. This is almost a supplement to that resume. It allows you to provide additional context that you're not able to include on your resume. So if I was really hurt about not being able to put that supervisory experience on my resume when I applied for a recruiter, that's something I could potentially include in a cover letter if I felt that was important to selling my case as to why somebody should pick my application for an interview. And then, like I mentioned, cover letters are not always required when you're applying for a position. And when you're applying for positions, you may even see that you get the red asterisk for a resume, but then there's an option to put a cover letter where it doesn't have a red asterisk, so it's not required. And you can really go either way. And you make that decision. When I was job searching, I said, I'm not putting in the time to write a cover letter, so I'm not going to do it. Sometimes that helps, sometimes it doesn't. But you make that decision ahead of time because, like I said, it's a lot of work on your end to make sure your cover letters are customized, free of grammar mistakes, making sure they're keeping relevant, all of those things. It's a lot of effort. But if you choose to write a cover letter, this is important information for you to include. So you want to have an introduction. Dear, insert hiring person's name here. If you can't find the person, I would address it to the company itself, but you want to avoid to whom it may concern, dear hiring manager, things that look generic, because that looks like you're not putting effort and research into the position and what's happening. So it's best if you can find the name of a hiring manager or an HR person to put on the application. But if you can't, you can address it to the company as a whole. You want to make sure you're including the position you're applying for and where you found it. So I am applying for your band teacher position that I found on LinkedIn. So that way they know exactly what you're applying for and where you found the information. You want to give a very brief summary, excuse me, of your qualifications. So that's just summarizing that one-page document of a resume into a paragraph at most. You really don't want your cover letter to be a copy of your resume. Excuse me one second. Me. Sorry about that. Then you're going to focus really on why you're interested on the about the position. You can talk about why the company draws to you, why the position draws to you, why you would think be a good fit. So I'm drawn to the music profession because I've always been involved with music. This is what it's done for me in my life. This is how I've been involved with music from third grade all the way through college. This is where my passion lies. This is really where you get to sell your why. And then you want to end with a closing paragraph. I'm so excited to be able to put forth my candidacy. I hope you take the time to consider, and I look forward to hearing back from you. So you just want to make sure you're following that format. Cover letters should not be longer than a page, once again. They can actually be a little shorter. So your cover letters don't necessarily need to be the whole page, but they do need to be a maximum of a page. Because again, the people reading these applications don't have the time to read multiple pages there. So that is as in-depth as I will get on cover letters because I think our time is better used talking about LinkedIn. But if you have more questions about cover letters or what you should do, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to go over that information with you. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is, I would consider, the primary social media site for job searching. So I'm sure if you've met with anybody on your campus at Career Services, they have encouraged you to create a LinkedIn page and a Handshake page. Handshake is really great for employers that are contracted with Handshake to get in there, but LinkedIn is pretty much universal. So when you go into your LinkedIn page, there's a couple things that I wanted to point out that are going to be important. So the first is your picture. So you want to have a nice headshot of yourself for this picture. It doesn't necessarily need to be professionally done. You don't necessarily need to be in your full suit and tie, business attire. you just want a nice headshot of yourself. So in my headshot, I have a denim jacket, which is typically not considered business attire, but I thought I looked good in it. So that's what I wore for my headshot. And that's all you need, keeping it simple there. Next, you're going to have your name. So you want to make sure you put the name that you want employers to look you up by. So I know sometimes on Facebook, people like to put their nicknames or whatever have you. This is probably an area where if you want somebody to look for you, you might consider using your government name or what have you there. And then on my LinkedIn page, I chose to include my pronouns. That's a personal preference. It doesn't hurt or help. It's just your preference of what you want to do. So here under here, I particularly have talent acquisition partner because that's my title. And right now my LinkedIn page is really used as a professional tool versus a personal tool. But this is where you can put aspiring band teacher, aspiring interprofession here, or active college student, or whatever you want to put, you can use that as an attention grabber there. I'm based in Arizona, so I have my information here in Arizona. And then we're going to talk about this open to button. I want to go over a little more things first, but this open to button is going to be really critical to helping you in your job search. So as you continue down your personal page, you're going to see an about section. So this about section is really an opportunity for you to sell yourself in a paragraph. So here I put very succinct information about my experience in recruitment, what I'm good at, what I'm proficient at, fluent in French. Some people here like to tell their story. They like to keep it engaged. Some people don't have anything on here. I do recommend having something there. Being able to summarize about yourself in an entertaining way is a good eye catcher, but you want to make sure that if you're getting creative about it, it's not so creative that it takes away from the actual content of your page. And then following that, you're going to have your experience. So here you'll be able to list out your experience and you can put the details. So what I particularly like about LinkedIn is that this is a resume without the resume constraints. So I literally have my information back from my freshman year of college all the way through what I'm currently doing right now because it's LinkedIn. I don't have to limit it to a page. So if an employer is looking, they can really get a big scope of what I'm doing there. So that's a cool thing about LinkedIn that I like that you can't necessarily do in your resume. You'll have an opportunity to put your education. And the cool thing about putting your education is that it will link you to other people. So when you're looking for a job, it will show you, hey, 13 people from San Diego State University currently work here. So it gives you an easier opportunity for networking, especially if you can find who those people are and say, hey, my name is Kendall. I went to San Diego State. You went to San Diego State. Can you tell me a little bit about, what you're doing here and how you use your degree? So it's an easier way to start those conversations on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn automatically does the work for you to tell you who's there. And then you have the skills portion. So here's where you can go and you can pick your top 8 skills or however many skills you want to list there. And you can get people to endorse you in that. So if, you're really good at Excel, you can go in and if you're networked with your professors or some of your sisters or some of your other classmates, they can go in and endorse that skill. They can write comments about it. They can just endorse it, but it's an opportunity to really showcase. On my end, it's a avenue of LinkedIn that I have not used to its fullest on my account, but it does help as managers and employers are sifting through information to see how people are endorsed in those skills. And you can pick the skills. So it doesn't have to be team management. It's really catered to what you feel your best skills are. So I want to talk about that open to work button because it's really important. So what that open to work button does, it essentially allows you to tell employers what you're looking for when you're working. So you can include any job titles. So when I was looking for a recruiter position, I had talent acquisition, I had recruiter, I had talent management. You can pick up to 3. And so what's nice about that is that it really covers all the different titles that different employers may be using, because sometimes there's like 7 titles for literally the same job description. So it just allows you to get a wider scope of the positions out there. You can talk about your location. So if you want to be fully remote, if you want a hybrid position, or if you're okay with being on site. So those are important. And don't lie to yourself. If you want to be fully remote, you can be fully remote. You just need to put it on there. Don't put on site if you're not interested in being on site. If you do select an on-site, it will ask you where you want to be. So I was in the general Tempe, Phoenix area. So that's what I had at the time when I did this. It'll ask for your employment type. So if you're looking for an internship or full-time employment, you can put that in there, which is really nice because then it'll sift through the information for you. So you're not confusing one versus the other. And then my favorite functionality about this is who can see that you're open to work. So if you don't want the whole world to know that you're looking for a job, you can use recruiters only. So only people who have LinkedIn Recruiter, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute, can look you up. Otherwise, if you want everybody to be able to see, that's when you get that fancy schmancy open to work banner that goes around your profile picture, that green one. So it literally shows for every person that's on LinkedIn that you're open to work. So there's some pros and cons to both. So as a professional, I did not want to know for my previous employer to know that I was looking. So I kept it limited to LinkedIn recruiters because I didn't need the whole world to know. When I was fresh out of school, didn't matter, needed a job. Anybody please take me. So that is something where I was able to post it online and people can share and people can look if they see opportunities that work for you. So you kind of have to pick what's best for you. But once you save your options, what this also does is LinkedIn will send you emails every day saying, hey, these jobs are open for you based off of what you said you were open to work for. And so they find jobs for you to apply for. So then you can read through and see if that position is a good fit for you. So the fun part about this is that this takes away half of the work of searching if you have this open to work set up correctly. So next I want to show you LinkedIn Recruiter because it's not something you get to see a lot, but I want you to see what the recruiters see on there in here. So, what did I do? Oops, clicked the wrong button. There we go, share. So this is what LinkedIn Recruiter looks like. So when I'm a recruiter, this is where I can go to post my jobs. I can see reports on who's applying for it. I can see the different projects that we're working on. But more importantly, this is how I can advance search a person. So if I'm looking for somebody who I want to be a band teacher or a music teacher, I can put in music professor, music professional, music teacher. I can put in geographic location. So if I know that this needs to be in Tallahassee, I can put in geographic location, Tallahassee, Florida, and surrounding areas. I put the workplace, those skills and assessments I can put in school. So if I'm specifically looking for somebody who came from one of my alma maters, I can type in that school there. I can look at graduation year. So if I want fresh graduates versus more experienced professionals, we can put that in there. Industries, keywords, employment type. So you can literally put any type of information about a candidate that you are looking for there. So if my candidate has to speak German, I can put that in there. So you can really see the different areas that you can put in here. If you have military experience, that's a great way to put in. You can see the recruiting applications. You can see everything in here. So this is a good guide for when you're filling out your LinkedIn. You want to be really detailed so that you can show up in these advanced searches that recruiters are using to find people. The other thing I will tell you about LinkedIn is that they do track if you respond to messages or not. So if you get a message, even if it's unsolicited, you have no interest, you could just respond by saying, thank you, I appreciate the time. Thank you, I appreciate the message, because it shows that you're responsive to message, and that is something that recruiters can see on the LinkedIn side. So just a fun fact about LinkedIn and the tools that they have there. So I know we're running short on time, but I want to make sure we cover just the last bit of information we have for tonight. So we have some general job searching tips, right? So the first is to keep your resume up to date. So like I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, your resume is a living, breathing document that you're going to be updating throughout all your life. I recommend that every time the time changes, or in my case, because I live in Arizona, it doesn't change, you update your resume. So every time you change the smoke detectors in your house, the smoke detector batteries, you should update your resume. And the reason for this is because it's much easier to remember 6 months of information versus 4 years of information. So it helps you really keep track of all the information that you've been doing so that you're not forgetting important projects, you're not forgetting promotions or anything like that that may happen. As you're applying for positions, you want to make sure that you're researching the companies that you apply for. Most questions that you will be asked in the phone screen is, tell me why you're interested in this role or in this company. If you can't talk about the company, that shows to them that they haven't researched it. So I know this can be difficult, especially if you're applying for 20, 30 jobs, 40 jobs a week. So an Excel spreadsheet is a great way to keep track of this information. There's many ways to organize it. You find what works best, but you want to make sure that you at least do some basic research on the companies you're applying for. Next is don't fear the ATS. So the applicant tracking system is kind of the boogeyman of the hiring world these days. A lot of companies will tell you that the ATS automatically kills resumes. You have to put in keywords to beat the ATS, all of that. I'm here to debunk the myth that that is all malarkey. If they had ATSs that could do that, I would not have a job. I have a job because ATSs can't do that. So in most cases, I would say 98% of cases, somebody who is a human is reading your resume in the process. If you get automatic kickback resumes, it's because they may have knockout questions such as, have you completed this degree? If you put no, then you're automatically disqualified. They didn't even read your resume at that point because you didn't meet the basic qualifications right off the bat. So don't fear the ATS and make sure you're applying well there. You want to practice interviewing. Interviewing is a skill that's not developed overnight. A good way to practice interviewing is to practice on your family. I like to practice with my pets just so that I can get the good flow of things. I like to practice in the mirror as well, because you can see the way you speak. You can see if you're holding your head crooked. You can see if you're doing all sorts of things with your hands. But you want to practice interviewing. And you want to make sure that you know general situations. So if somebody says, tell me a time that you had to work on a project with a team member who didn't want to participate, you already have those examples in the back of your head. So you want to think about general questions, behavioral questions that they will ask you that you can practice to yourself. Want to come prepared with questions for every interview. I recommend a minimum of 3 questions for interviews that are relevant to the position. Just so that way, as much as they're interviewing you, you also want to make sure it's a good cultural fit for yourself. You want to send some thank you notes. Now, personally, I have mixed feelings about thank you notes. Some people really love them, and that makes a difference in their job search, which is why I recommend for people to do thank you notes. My personal opinion is, this is my job, I don't need a thank you note. But not everybody feels that way. So I do encourage people to write thank you notes, even though I personally think they're a little obsolete. If you get a job offer, don't be afraid to negotiate your salary. Women in particular are typically get lower offers because we're not likely to advocate for ourselves. So we want to make sure that we are not afraid to negotiate. And that's something that you can practice. And you can practice with your parents or a mentor, or even one of your counselors or CVAs. You can practice with whoever has experience in the workplace on that negotiation. And the next are to be patient and be kind to yourself. Job searching is not easy and it's not fun. It's very stressful. Every time you apply for a job, you're checking your email. Every time your phone buzzes, you say, oh my gosh, is it them? And then it's not. And then you get mad at your phone for not giving you the news you want. So you really want to let yourself be patient and be kind to yourself because it is stressful and it takes time. Some folks will get back to you in 2 days. Some folks will get back to you in 2 to 3 weeks. So you really want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself throughout this process. So that way you're not burning yourself off through the job search. All right. So I know we went through a ton of information in very little time, but does anybody have any questions?
Actually, I did have a question. So specifically, for example, you didn't shy away from, putting Tau Beta Sigma on the resume, and it is important. We tell our students that all the time. I guess my question is how do you balance the not including a picture on your resume, but then including something that is still an identifier? It's currently, like, for example, like if you put CVA, they could go to our website and go, if they wanted to. They shouldn't, but if they wanted to. And so I guess what is your advice in that realm of like, how do you share that information and make it useful?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the reality is these days, if somebody wants to know what you look like, they can find it, right?
Sure.
So if you're on LinkedIn or Handshake, you have a profile picture, that information's out there anyway.
Right.
So for me, it's making sure that the experience that you're putting in is relevant. So if you're applying for a job in finance and you are a treasurer, that's an excellent position. You can talk about balancing the books. You can talk about keeping a budget, making a budget, things like that. But if you're the treasurer and you put parliamentarian experience, it's not as relevant, but you can still talk about the leadership development skills. You can talk about leading a group and keeping order and consistency. So it's making sure that you're not just listing the bullet points that are in your constitution on the resume, but making sure that you're really catering it to showcase the skill that you're wanting to showcase through that experience.
Sure.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I have a question. So how do you feel about Indeed? Or do you have any comments about it?
Yeah, Indeed is a popular system. I would say it's not as robust as LinkedIn, so you don't have all the fancy schmancy pictures and all of that. What Indeed will do is it will create a resume for you. If you have an account, and I think you might have to pay for that. I'm not sure anymore. So we'll create a resume for you. I would say, the same thing that I would say about ChatGPT or any of those. Anytime you're getting a resume created for you, you still want to go through and check to make sure that everything is relevant, because sometimes they don't know how to sell you better than you know how to sell you. So it's good as a base, but it's better for you to put your eyes on it. In terms of job boards, excellent job boards, definitely have good positions. You do tend to find a lot of entry-level positions on Indeed. So that is a good place to start, particularly if you're looking for an entry-level position. But yeah, you use the job board that works best. I know in Arizona, teachers have a specific job board that they use that's different from Indeed or LinkedIn. In higher education, we have higheredjobs.com. That is a really popular source. So you have to find out what the best job boards are for your profession, but Indeed is a very used website.
Okay, thank you.
Nice. Any other questions?
Well, it's actually not a question. I just wanted to say this was very helpful because during the year, we actually had a resume 101 event, and we partnered with the business organization on our campus. And, we kind of talked about the same things that you talked about having your name be the biggest thing and trying to keep your resume down to one page and only having relevant information. So it's good to see that everything that we told them was right. So yeah, thank you.
Of course, and I'm glad that you're doing that's such a good service for your chapter and the people who are able to participate, because it can be really daunting, especially if it's your first one, which a lot of the times it is when you're in college. So that's a really great service that you're doing there.